Good evening. Welcome back to the Henry Holster Shop. It is Monday. Boy, was it a Monday. This is episode 32 of HolsterLife. Tonight we are back to basics. This is the first iteration, the first part of the basics series. And I was realizing that my recent HolsterLife broadcasts have gotten very much into some bigger picture, more theoretical stuff, more business-oriented stuff that isn't so much about the craft of holster making. It isn't about the nuts and bolts and the details of working with Kydex and Bolteron, but is more big picture or business stuff, which, while useful, is not all that goes into having a successful holster company. So I decided to take a step back and launch a short mini-series within the HolsterLife series focused on how we actually do all the stuff in the shop. And so I've got a whole bunch. This is going to be a rapid fire downloading a ton of information. Any questions you have are fair game. My comments appear to be working this evening already. I'm seeing guys show up. Hello, Nick. Hello, Greg. And so I will get through questions as quickly as I can. If I don't get to your question, don't take it personally. I will go back and pull from the questions that get asked that I can't answer and make sure to get to them either in text or into the next episode of Basics. So there's going to be a Basics 2, a Basics 3, a Basics 4, covering or expanding on all kinds of things that get covered in this Basics 1. But first, I've got one more quick prop I need to pick up tonight before I start the feed. So excuse me for 1 second. Hi, Will Silk. Gotta have my Nalgene water. Can't do the broadcast without my bottle of water. So, first things first, I brought my spoon, which means I'm ready to spoon feed tons of information. I hope you came hungry because here we go. So, starting off, holster, very basic. Its purpose is to safely and securely encase a firearm. You can conceal it on your person. You can open carry it. There are tons of different styles. Many different materials are used. Most holster shops are working with Kydex or Bolteron or Holstex. Those are the three basic brands, the basic lines of plastic that are commonly used. Hi, David Milha. Hi, Gary Lawson. If you are a Kydex company, part-time or full-time, please post your company name in the comments. I would also appreciate it if you would share the feed. I joined the Kydex Holsters group on Facebook very recently. And this is the first time I've had a Facebook feed where I published an invite there on the Kydex Holster Facebook group. So it would also be very helpful and instructive to me if you could let me know where you found the announcement about tonight's feed. Where did you see it to know to be here tonight? Was it Instagram? Was it a Facebook group? If it was Facebook, which Facebook group was it? Because it helps me know where best to communicate to the guys who are actually interested in the info that I'm putting out. So, Kydex, Holstex, Bolteron. Three similar kind of overlapping types of thermoplastic. We're dealing with PVC-based plastics. Kydex is one brand, Bolteron is another major brand. Holstex is a proprietary blend that's manufactured by Bolteron for Steve Andrews and Knife Kits, CKK Industries. Has some different features, some different ingredients, forms a little bit differently. Some shops do Kydex only, some do Bolteron only, some do a mix, some do all three types. My shop is primarily Bolteron, although I do work with Kydex occasionally. Hello, Chris Hostetter. Hi, Tim Johnson. Thank you guys for stopping by. When I first started off, a little bit of background, I made my first holsters in late 2008. I first got into it because I was interested in hybrid holsters, but I've always been a tinkerer. I had a lot of shop experience. I knew how to build instruments. I had a small wood shop, and I decided that I was going to go ahead and make some of my own. So my friend Stephen Baker and I got some Kydex from knifekits.com at that time and made our first outside the waistband paddle holsters and then hybrid holsters. And it was LLC versus sole prop, Greg Swanson. If you're a full-time business, I strongly recommend LLC over sole prop. Sole prop is easier, taxes are simpler, a lot of things are less complicated, but you have less protection from liability, and it's harder for your business to grow. Some things are easier to do as an LLC. If you're considering sole prop versus LLC, you need a CPA. You should find somebody who specializes in small business and have a sit-down meeting with them, explain what you do, show them your current books, what you're doing in terms of revenue and expenses, and ask what they think you should do. Tried to cut my first sheet of kydex tonight with a Dremel Multimax and a straight edge and utility knife. Now I know I need a bandsaw. Alex Wick, cutting kydex, basic options, snap and score and snap, which is a straight edge and a utility knife. Very effective, works great for straight cuts, pretty easy to do, fast and clean, doesn't make a big mess, not good for curves and not good for curved surfaces generally. When you're forming, in the bad old days, a lot of guys used aircraft shears or sheet metal shears, tin snips, any kind of heavy cutting pliers. Those would work but tended to kind of bend and break the kydex at the edge, and you couldn't make smooth curves. You ended up doing a sort of a choppy series of cuts, and you'd have a lot of shaping work to do with a Dremel or a sander after the fact. When it comes to power tools to cut, some guys use scroll saws, some use band saws. A scroll saw has a small, short blade, kind of like a kind of like a small hand coping saw, but it oscillates up and down. It is good for making very tight cuts. If you're doing detail work, scroll saw wins over bandsaw, but for speed and efficiency and smooth cutting, bandsaw wins over scroll saw 10 times out of 10, and scroll saw blades are much more likely to break than bandsaw blades, although some of you guys seem to have an incredible talent for breaking bandsaw blades. Hello, Kydex. Kydex and Boltaron, I began using both and gradually worked into using Boltaron almost exclusively. I find from my process and the way that I like to heat and form that Boltaron 4332 worked very well for me. It's available in a couple of colors, although you have to buy a pallet, a 4x8 foot pallet at a time in order to get anything besides black. And so I don't buy a lot of colored Boltaron 4332. For colored runs or anything smaller that I need, I'll use Boltaron 4335, which is carried by a number of the plastics distributors, or I'll go to Kydex if it's a shade I can't easily get in Boltaron. In terms of distributors, if you are a small holster company today, the number of options you have available to buy supplies is absolutely mind-boggling. I'm just going to blow through off the top of my head a whole bunch of lists of places to get different kinds of things. If you're buying plastic, your go-tos are Knife Kits or Holstersmith, same company, two different websites. Index Fastener, ifithermoplastics.com, DIY Holster. Here's my breakdown. I do business with all these companies, nothing personal. Let me just give you what I think. If you were on the East Coast, Index has 2 locations, in California and 1 in Virginia. Knife Kits is based down south. DIY is in Ohio. Depending on what you want to get, if DIY or Knife Kits has it, you'll almost always get it faster than if you order it from Index, is my impression. Sometimes I've ordered things from Index that came only from the Virginia location and they got to me in Indiana pretty quickly. Other times things had to come from California and that takes longer. Index is a much bigger company that does a lot of other things besides thermoplastics. I've found Knife Kits to be very responsive. Steve Andrews, who is largely responsible for that whole thing, is very active on the Facebook groups. He's active on the forums. Gordon, also from Knife Kits, is around on the Kydex Pro forum occasionally. Other places to buy supplies. Spider Concealment sells soft loops. These guys, these aren't theirs, these are mine, but you can buy them from Spider Concealment at a very good price. HolsterLoops.com is a place to get soft loops, overhooks, struts. Let's see, who else? Tackware has a line of injection molded hardware. RC Holster Supply has a line of injection molded hardware. DIY Holster has some of their own injection molded stuff and also sells a bunch of OEM products from Raven Concealment Systems, including their height adjustable struts with a slot. These are very good. A lot of guys will use them and like them. Molds. DIY Holster sells both whole gun drones, and they have a series of moth molds, which are split molds for vacuum forming. Multimolds.com is the big player in prepped holster molds. They make both full gun molds and split molds. They have several different varieties. Pistolforms.com is another one. My friend Conrad Miller runs that and sells CNC machined molds. Some Pistol Forms products are going in under the Multi-Molds brand this spring. So if you're interested in HDPE machine split molds like this guy, these have been sold through Pistol Forms and are now going to be being sold through Multi-Molds. Hazmat Holsters also has the Tough Clip, which is a very solid overhook available in 1.5 and 1.75. There are lots and lots of small companies who each have a couple of products, and depending on what you're trying to make, any or all of them could be worth checking out for you. Whew. Got my spoon, laying it out. Of the three kinds of plastic, I generally found that Bolt-Around vacuum formed more easily for me. Kydex was available in more colors. Carbon fibers. It used to be that we had kind of janky-looking graphic prints. Now there are a number of textured carbon fibers where a carbon fiber crosshatch pattern is extruded into the plastic at the time of manufacture. That product is made by Bolt-Around. Kydex doesn't have the ability to make it or doesn't make it. So if you're using an actual carbon fiber print, you're dealing with Bolt-Around. And you've probably noticed if you use Kydex and you use some carbon fiber that those tend to heat and form a little bit differently. It's not just because of the texture, they're actually different plastics. Heating options. I started off with a little toaster oven that I got for $6 from Goodwill. Temperature fluctuated wildly. It was very inconsistent. I had to leave the plastic in for a long time to get it to work. Hi, Dennis Miller. And then I made the jump to a larger, more convection oven that had a larger area. I could put bigger pieces in. I could put multiple pieces in. I used to use mason stones or glazed tile to put in there, and I'd preheat them, and then when the temperature of the actual heaters would fluctuate, the stones in the oven would help regulate the temperature and keep my plastic a little more evenly heated during its heating cycle. Then I made the jump to a heat press, which a lot of guys are using today. T-shirt presses are often used in dye sublimation or dye transfer processes to put graphics on T-shirts. But we found they worked very, very well to heat thin plastics. The go-to places are Amazon and eBay for those. PowerPress is a commonly used brand. A lot of the heat presses under $500 are made in China. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. If they break, warranty, replacement parts, kind of not an option. So if you're going to buy a Chinese heat press, I recommend putting the extra 20 bucks in and getting the 1-year warranty, because I had one die on me in less than that and had no warranty, ended up junking it. If you're looking for a more premium press, Heat Press Nation has a lot of good options. I use a press made by Geonite. Also, Stahl's Hottronics with an X at the end, makes a very nice line of more higher-end heat presses. The Geonite K20 that I have and a lot of the Hottronics presses are over $1,000 a piece, but they provide exceptionally even heat, very controllable temperatures. They're built robustly, and they're American companies. So if you have a problem, you can get a live person who can answer your questions and get you replacement parts in a hurry. So if you're doing a handful of holsters here or there, RC claw and soft loops, like an RC, I don't want to type George Cesarini, there is a holster that has a wing for concealment for the Glock and the XC1 made by Guncraft. If you're looking for a holster that has that extra concealment option for the XC1, Guncraft, the Arcane, I forget the holster name. I forget the product name. But Jeremy Williams from Guncraft has an excellent XC1 holster. I like it especially because I designed the mold for it, and I also manufacture the wings that he uses. But definitely check out the Guncraft XC1 holster. If you're making a handful of holsters here or there, using a toaster oven or a small convection oven will work for you. If you actually want to have consistent results that you can do lots of plastic over and over and over again, it is absolutely worth spending several $100s on a t-shirt press and then wasting some plastic. Get an infrared thermometer. If you're going to do Kydex work, you really need to have one. They're $40 or $50. You need to actually know what the real life temperatures of your material are. Relying on the thermostat gauge on a heat press is not accurate enough, and you need to be able to adjust what the actual temperature is versus what the screen or the dial that you're adjusting says. Just like dope with a scope, the bullet tells the truth. The IR thermometer in Kydex work tells the truth. When you pull plastic out of your heat source and you quickly lay it down and you IR thermometer it, what you've actually got there is what your heat source is producing. So check that. If you have weird forming issues, stuff isn't working well, double check your temps. Sometimes heating elements go bad, things get weird. Even in my shop, I notice differences in forming from summer versus winter, because in the winter I keep the shop about 45 degrees, which is why the down coat and the hat. In the summer it gets up into the 90s in here, and I find that 40 degree or so difference in temperature of the plastic just sitting in my shop actually means I have to adjust my time and temperature recipes in the summer to be a little bit shorter so I don't overheat my material. If you've recently joined, please like the feed, please share the feed, and if you are a holster company, please post your company name in the comments. I would also really like to know how you found out about this Facebook Live feed and ended up here. So if you could tell me, please, where you saw the announcement about tonight's feed, if you were invited by a friend, who mentioned it to you, if you saw it on Instagram or Facebook, where did you see it? That would be helpful to me to know how best to distribute info about when the feeds are going to happen and what the topics will be. Other things, hardware. Quick deal on eyelets. These are the eyelets that are commonly used in non-adjustable retention taco holsters and also outside the waistband pancake holsters. Multi-holsters in the kind of spending group. Cool. Thank you for sharing, Dustin. These are Stimson GS eyelets. I buy mine from Siska, but a number of companies carry them, and they pretty much all come from Stimson. A little over a year ago, Stimson started offshoring a lot of these, and guys had problems with inconsistent heat treat and a lot of eyelets splitting. I don't know how that's been resolved. I still had old stock of about 50,000 eyelets that I bought from Siska a long time ago, and they've continued to work well for me. So until I use those up, I haven't had to deal with the offshored ones. We've got at least one guy watching the feed who's on his honeymoon. I don't know how your wife should take that. Either she's all in on the business and is watching with you, or you're digging yourself a hole before you're even a month in. So, hey, Ryan Davis, saw it in the Kai's Holster Facebook group. Often, awesome. Hey, Tim Nicholson. When it comes to actually setting these, hey, Nick Sags, appreciate Blade, Riggs coming by. Work never dies. Yeah, that's true, Jeff Kwan. It doesn't never die, but sometimes you should take a break. These are sized, the common sizes are 8'8", 8'9", 8'10", and 8'12". 8 refers to the diameter. The second digit refers to your length. 8'8" is what is typically used for two thicknesses of .06 or .08. You can also use 8'9". I recommend 8'9" for any holsters made out of .08 or .093 plastic. 8'10s and 8'12 eyelets are for thicker stuff if you're using .125 eighth-inch thick material, or you're dealing with material that has fabric laminated on it. It's got some extra thickness. 8'10s and 8'12s are good for that. If you want small quantities of those, I think you can get them from Index Fastener. I know you can get them from knifekits.com or Holstersmith in small bags. Whenever I stocked 8'10s, I always bought them from Knife Kits. Tools for these. You can flare these a couple different ways. The industry standard for small shops is to get an arbor press. Half-ton or 1-ton is recommended. Quarter-ton presses don't have as much oomph as I like. And several different companies sell male and female dies that will mate together to flare the straight side of this after you put it through the quarter-inch hole you've drilled in your plastic. Places to get dies. Index Fastener has dies. USA Knife Maker has their own dies. Knife Kits has their own dies. I don't think DIY Holster has their own dies. I don't remember. And then Siska sells dies. I've used all the ones but the Index Fastener dies, never tried those, and I like the Siska dies best. They're quite a bit more expensive, but for the number of eyelets I set and the few that I split with the Siska dies, they have been well worth the money. KnifeKits.com has several different types of dies, ones that are designed for an arbor press and ones that come with a small alignment jig and are meant to be tacked with a hammer. If you need to flare some eyelets but you don't do a lot of holsters, the small journeyman eyelet die set from knifekits.com is a great investment, and you can always, if you get to a point where you're doing too many for that to be practical, upgrade to an arbor press, which Knife Kits also sells with dies. You can get the whole package there. You're welcome, Steve Andrews. Hello, Jess Hazelar. In the bad old days, we used a lot of blue guns. We would apply tape, usually blue tape. Then guys got into aluminum heat duct or heat vent tape to block out the shape. This one you can see the ejection port is filled in with a piece of leather that is epoxied in there. Some guys use Bondo, water well, different kinds of putty, Sculpey, and stuff to fill in those shapes. Obviously, a holster needs to be roughly the shape of the firearm, but you don't want a lot of little details molded in. Otherwise, the thing snags on the way in and the way out. The ideal fit on a holster is smooth on the way in with a nice firm click when you get into your final position. And then on the draw, you want to break past the retention point cleanly, and after that have very little resistance on the way out. The person using the holster should know when it's all the way in and know when it's coming out, and not be thinking, well, it feels like it's kind of stiff, it's almost all the way in. And so some guys still use these, although blue guns are not as popular anymore since other companies have come on the market with reinforced, denser, heavier duty, more durable resin molds or poured product molds. Other companies worth mentioning, obviously multi-molds is the big one. DIY has full drones and split drones. Jason Cook does QLH molds. I believe he's out of Alaska. Those are very, very highly recommended. I have not had a chance to handle one. I've been meaning to check some out, but I haven't gotten around to it. If you work with complete molds, you can fold, if you're making tacos, you can fold the entire holster shut around this and press it in foam in a single operation. George says your page was recommended. Just happened to scroll past your live feed in the wall. Awesome. Well, I'm happy you saw it on the wall and stopped in. If you use split molds like this, where the gun is divided into two halves, you'll be forming the sheet all flat at one time, and then later you will go through and you will use, in a secondary heating step, you'll heat up this center line and fold shut the two halves of the holster. In order to fold the holster shut, you have to have a drone, a blue gun, or a real gun to actually fold the shell around and make sure the trigger guard halves are aligned and your holes and everything line up. Blue guns are still useful for that. I like them because they don't have any blocking on them. So I sometimes use them for folding, but I always test fit with a real gun. I make a lot of holsters. For me, the liability side of not test fitting with a real gun is a big deal, so I buy real guns for every gun model that I offer and every gun that I make a mold for. So if you're a holster company and you approach me about a custom mold, if it's a gun I don't have, I buy it. Or, I mean, if it's a gun I think I'm going to make more than just your mold. Very rarely do I buy a brand new gun just to make a one-off mold. It's happened, but not common. All right, not sure if my comments are frozen. It's been a minute. Todd May, how big of a sight channel is on Conrad's molds? I believe, I'll double check for you right now, I think the standard spacing here is on this Glock 19, we're at 1.2 inches. On my custom molds, I tend to stick with 1.25 as my standard spacing. On Conrad's molds, the Pistol Formers molds, I believe the sight channel spacing is actually proportional to the thickness of the gun slide. But about 1.25 is pretty common. That's what I'd recommend. If you are buying split molds that are in two halves and you're lining them up yourself, 1.25 inches is a safe place to start. If you have a little too much plastic between the halves, all that means is your sight channel will be a little bit taller, which is fine. If you don't have enough material, it will mean that your holster shell will not form up well when you try to fold it, and that is a problem. Hello, Shane Muse. Thank you for posting that link, Alex Wick. What's up next? Hardware, screws, and screw posts. We use A32 machine screws as the industry standard fastener for putting belt loops, anything else onto a holster, because A32s go very nicely through the barrel of an 8-whatever eyelet. Screw posts are used on the back side, and they look like this little guy. Slotted back with a flange, 832 threaded. This is one of mine. I have my own. I have these made custom for me. Nobody else has these ones, which are cool. There's no voodoo way to do splits with a press. Marco, there is a voodoo way to do splits with a press. You can do it with a foam press. Typically, if you're going to do splits with a foam press, you're going to be using an automotive style A-frame or H-frame hydraulic press, where you've got two plates that are closed this way. Another variation on this is what was called the Iron Wolf press, promoted by, first I saw it, it was made by Jim Gedville of Iron Wolf Holsters. And it's basically a square frame framed out of 2x4s, and you use a manual scissor jack, and you crank the top plate down onto the base, and you basically have foam in, It's sort of like book press, but typically when I think of a book press, I think of two loose plates that are closed at both edges with hand clamps. This is one large central clamp that smushes your top plate down on your bottom plate. I have a Super Iron Wolf press, a big one that I built. Late again, Go Hard Holsters is here. Well, as is usual, if you show up late, you have to share the feed. So go ahead and share the feed, Tyler. Kinds of foam presses commonly used. The book press is basically oftentimes just two pieces of plywood, 3/4 inches common, with a couple layers of foam, and you would put plastic, gun mold, plastic, or if you're doing a taco, you'd wrap the plastic around your gun mold, put it in, and then close with clamps on 2 or 4 of the edges. Crank it all down, let it cool. A coffee bum press is an upright style press that has a hinged back and has 2 plates that open this way to the sides. You lay foam through, usually one single connecting piece, so you can press down on the center piece of foam and get upward pressure on your sight channel. And then you would lay your mold in, you would open the press, drape Kydex in, press your mold down in it and gradually close it. And then when you got it closed, put a large Irwin or DeWalt or some kind of clamp or 2 on top and crush those sides together, and then you can form the taco holster shell in one operation. There are pros and cons to coffee bumming versus molding on a split mold. If your holster is perfectly symmetrical and has an ambi height, low cut or mid height or full height sweat guard, and you can make the whole taco shell at once and then lay it on its side and put it in a bandsaw and cut the entire outline at once, then a coffee bum is a very efficient way to go because you can do your cutting after forming very easily. If you have a holster where you've got a high sweat guard on one side and a low cut mouth on the other side, you can't cut that after folding easily. You can always go around to the back side and pull cuts through the bandsaw and do goofy stuff, which I've done plenty of. But it's easier if you're using split molds to make a template and lay it over your shell, trace it, and bandsaw it all flat, sand your edges, roughly clean them up, and then fold them up. Shane Waller asked, what's my method for outside the waistband vacuuming? Okay, well, Shane, I have the advantage of having over $100,000 in CNC equipment in my shop, which means I can make molds the way that I want to. So my method for doing outside the waistband vacuum forming is I machine molds for myself that have half the gun and a backer with angled wings and all the eyelet locations and hardware and everything machined into the molds so that I've got all my drill locations built in. Then I vacuum form that shell. I have a reverse image mold with half the gun and wings angled the opposite way for the back. And I simply vacuum form the 2 pieces, cut off the excess plastic, drill out holes for alignment. The part's made up, the wing angles are already bent in, the gun goes right in and goes click. It's a lot of time spent to develop and tune the molds, but the process of actually making the holsters is pretty easy after that point. If you are making outside the waistband holsters and you don't have access to that kind of mold, which is most guys who don't have access, the most commonly used solution, as far as I can see, is either a curved jig on a membrane vacuum former or red-eye angle backers, either on a membrane or a non-membrane vacuum former. But before I get into that, I got to talk vacuum formers. Vacuum forming is very, very simple. You're going to use atmospheric pressure to push the Kydex down onto your mold. What this means is you use a vacuum pump and you have to have a way to seal off the plastic over your mold, and then you suck out all the air that's around the mold and on top of the mold underneath the hot plastic, and the plastic collapses onto the mold and takes the shape of your holster. There are 2 basic types of holster vacuum formers that are in use, membrane and non-membrane forming. I look like a spaceman, Mr. Henry. Dave Baker is in the house. Well, it's just kind of cold in here, Dave. It's a little bit chilly. Membrane vacuum forming typically uses a hinged lid with a frame that has a silicone membrane. 30 or 40 mils thick is pretty common. A couple different companies make these. The original one that became popular, Mikey B, started pumping it on the forums, and then Stewart founded a company called Blue Light Tactical and started making hinged lid membrane vacuum formers. So the original BLT former, which was good for holsters, but not so much for sandwiches. Shane Waller, going to ever offer those? I do already offer custom outside the waistband molds, but they are full customs and they're quite expensive, quite a bit more than the gun by itself would actually be. If you're interested in more info about that, you can shoot me an email, orders@henryholsters, and I can get you a price list. But unless you're doing probably several hundred units a month of that model, it's not going to be especially cost effective for you. So the BLT was the first commercially available membrane former that I was aware of. I bought one in 2013. It worked fine. I made a lot of holsters with it. You could make, at that point, I was taking blue guns, chopping the grip off, putting them on my bandsaw, splitting them down the center, resawing them, and building my own split molds. I also built outside the waistband molds for myself that way. I liked to do asymmetrical splits, not 50-50. I was doing 60-40. And so I'd get another blue gun, chop the grip off, and split it off center, and then build two separate flat plates with a backer that was large enough to get my outside the waistband shape. And I would put in some pins to mark my drill locations for some alignment eyelets. And I would form those two halves. They'd have the gun half, but the wings would be flat. I'd take them off, I'd drill those holes, I'd line them up, I'd put all the eyelets in, cut the outline, pull the hardware out, make sure everything was good, sand the edges, then set the eyelets, and then I would reheat the wings and bend them on a jig, and then cool them, and then polish those side edges. Worked perfectly fine, wasn't super fast, had a few too many steps for my preferences. The other company that came into the market making membrane formers is HD Industrial Design, and they're still around. They have the HD 100, the HD 200, the HD 300. GarageWorks also came in and made a small membrane former. I've not seen a lot of those in the wild. I haven't heard much about them either way. They always seem like they never quite made it. HD is the industry standard for small membrane formers. Vic, who runs HD Industrial, has put out some good videos on YouTube. You can find them on YouTube or on his website. The HD 100 is pretty small. The HD 200 is the Ford Taurus of vacuum formers. It's the one almost everybody uses. And the 300 is really big. If you're trying to do a lot of stuff at once, then the 300 has a lot of room, but takes up a fair bit of space. The membrane allows you to use a small piece of Kydex that's just larger than your holster, and then the membrane seals around the edges of your former, and you suck out all the air that's under the membrane on the entire table to form your plastic. The benefits are it's very efficient. You use less plastic. The trade-offs are you have a lot more air to suck out, and so you get full definition a little bit more slowly, not major, but a little bit more slowly. And also the silicone membrane acts as an insulator, which means your cooling times are longer. Some guys mist some water on there or put like ice packs on it or blow a fan on it, but the silicone will always slightly slow down your cooling times. And all that means is that you have to wait a little longer to cycle it, and it also means that your molds soak up more heat during each press cycle. And depending on what molds you're using, what they're made of, you do sometimes have to cool your molds between cycles to avoid overheating them and softening and then distorting or damaging the mold. And so fast cooling times are your friend. They allow you to go more cycles per hour and also not have to cool the molds as often because the molds are not leaching up heat for as long. Jason Craig says GarageWorks formers work. Yeah, I've never tried one. You can bust that membrane too with metal posts you block with. Do you ever use membrane anymore or just non-membrane? Shane, I only use non-membrane. I brought a press to market called the Swift Press. I made the first ones in 2015. I had several batches last year. I'm currently out of stock, but I'll be making more sometime later this spring. And the Swift Press is a dedicated non-membrane vacuum former. Although you can put a mold on it, put plastic on it, manually lay a membrane over it, and use the frame, and basically convert it into a temporary non-membrane former. The advantage of the Swift Press is it's built for non-membrane forming, and if that's what you want to do and you buy and set up molds that are optimized for non-membrane forming, the Swift Press is very simple, very durable. It's all aluminum. It's very tough. It handles heat very well. I think it's a great option. I've made tons of holsters on a Swift Press, and I know a lot of other guys who have bought one or two of them and have small shops who've been able to turn out lots and lots of work on a Swift Press. So it's a good option if you are geared more toward the production side and are trying to make higher volumes of holsters that are consistent from one to one to one. If you're doing a lot of custom work, every holster is different, then a non-membrane former like the HD 200 is a better option for you just because it's a little more versatile. Have seen them. I use HD mostly beginning to non. Love the non-membrane forming. Hi, Brent Fernandez, Advanced Holster in the house. Please share the feed. I have not owned an HD Industrial Design former. I know a lot of guys have a Swift press and an HD. They're solid deformers. I've heard good customer service from HD Industrial. And since there are so many of them out there, guys have a lot of tips and tricks for using them. And it's a known quantity. I wouldn't hesitate to get one if I were doing work that lent itself to that kind of forming. Non-membrane forming has a couple of advantages in my mind. I'm a production-oriented shop. I don't do any custom work anymore, although every once in a great while I find myself making something weird. But, you know, it is what it is. You got to keep, sometimes you got to keep friends and family happy. Non-membrane forming gets you the best possible definition you can get with vacuum forming, and it gives you the shortest cooling times because the plastic is exposed. There's no membrane insulating it. You can blow air directly on it and cool it very quickly. I use a cooling fan. Some guys use compressed air. I used to use compressed air, but I preferred then to be able to engage the vacuum, turn the fan on, and walk away and do something else for 30 seconds and not have to stand there blasting compressed air on it. Marco Alberto says there's tons of threads about this. What would the ballpark be for going from CB and book presses to vac? Presses and gear prices are always changing. So, Marco, if you want to get into vacuum forming, you're going to need a vacuum pump, you're going to need a vacuum press, you're going to need molds that are suitable for vacuum forming, and you're probably going to want to get a heat press. I don't think I know anybody who's vacuum forming, maybe there are, I'm just not aware of them, who are vacuum forming without using a heat press. We're still using an oven. I think that's pretty atypical today. The go-to pump that I recommend most is made by Robinair. It's the model 15800, runs about $285 on Amazon. Occasionally you can get it for less. Sometimes there are deals. There's another pump that's been available more recently. It's a little more powerful, but there aren't as many of them out there. It's a 12 CFM pump. I bought one. I haven't used it yet, and I cannot remember the brand name. I know FFR Holsters has one, Armadillo Concealment's using one, and Clark Trost from CNC Holsters has one, and they all like them. But that's the basics you'll need. You need a vacuum pump, you need a vacuum former, and you need a heat press. So expect to spend about $300 on the vacuum pump, spend about $500 on the former. You can build your own. You can build what I call a thrift press, and I have a Facebook Live video from a couple months ago about how to build your own mini Swift press out of less expensive materials. A heat press, expect to spend $250 to $350 if you're getting an inexpensive one off eBay or Amazon. If you're using a non-membrane former, you can plug it directly into your vacuum pump. If you're using a membrane former, then you're probably going to want to build a surge tank, or what's called a reservoir tank, which is basically an extra volume of space that you'll pre-vacuum so you have the ability to more quickly pull out the air that's inside your press. You can build them out of PVC pipe. You can use 4-inch PVC pipe and make yourself a tank. If you're going to use 4-inch PVC pipe, you need solid core, not cell core. The cell core is not strong enough. Some guys have used it, but it's not designed for those kind of pressures. So solid core, 4-inch PVC, and you can build yourself an inexpensive surge tank. HD Industrial Design sells a vacuum control unit that allows you to have a gauge that senses when the pressure in your press is going down, and it will automatically switch your pump back on. That can be good if you need to leave the press closed for a while. Good first heat press, Chip Ream. I got started with Power Press. I bought a 15x15 and I went through 2 different 16x24s. I had the advantage of doing enough volume to justify a more expensive press, so after my second Power Press died, I didn't go back, and I went and bought a Geonite K20, which was about $1,200. But it's a fantastic heat press. I would buy it again in a heartbeat if something happened to it. But even if something happened to it, it's got a great warranty. Hello, Mike Hallam, Holster Co. in the house. Please like and share the feed. So I think, personally, in my shop, I only use non-membrane forming. One other way guys are making outside the waistband holsters in a membrane former is with a curve jig. Hello, Nate Gallup, Omega Holsters. Thank you for sending that package today. I have not had a chance to mess with those yet. Probably going to play with that prototype idea tomorrow if I have time. Always late to these things. Yeah, you are. Had to pick up a slide from Jaegerworks. Ooh, so fancy. Wait. Mike Hallam, aren't you the guy that's always complaining about the price of molds and you're buying a Jaegerworks slide? I just got a phone call. Had to Had to decline it. Yeah, I got your number, Mike Hallam. I know how you roll. So a curve jig. A curve jig is basically just a curved surface that you lay foam on, and then you would lay plastic, gun mold, plastic, and then vacuum form it in a membrane former. You can use multi-molds, you can use DIY drones, you can use red feather molds, you can use quick lock holster, QLH from Alaska from Jason Cook. Any of those will work for a curve jig. The quality and the thickness of the foam you put on the jig, which forms the back side of your holster facing toward the jig, will affect the overall definition and fit of the holster. Sources for foam. Knife Kit sells a couple different grades of foam. Index sells a couple different grades of foam. I don't remember if DIY Holster sells foam. Carolina Custom Foam sells a couple different kinds of foam that guys like. I'm not real up on the foam scene because I don't buy any. I haven't bought any in a long time. But you can probably find relevant info about that on kydexpro.com or the Kydex Pro Business Owners Group on Facebook or Kydex Holsters. If you ask what foam guys are using, you can get good current recommendations from guys who are using foam. So that's a quick rundown on equipment, tools, bunch of things. Back to basics on the actual production of holsters. I divide holster forming into, oh yeah, that's another one I forgot, form for you. Foam for you. One of the, well, I divide it into, so there's prep, there's forming, shaping, finishing, and assembly. I break it down into a 5-part process. Prep is everything that happens before you heat plastic. Forming is actually shaping. Shaping is cutting away the excess plastic, shaping the outline, doing everything that has to go into making the final holster shape. And then finishing is polishing, cleaning up all your edges, deburring eyelet holes, anything else that has to happen before the holster gets assembled. And then, of course, you have assembly. I find that guys often spend too much time messing around in the shaping and finishing side because they skimped, or they have hassles in the forming step because they skimped in the prep step. Prep is the game, because if your molds are not carefully prepped, nothing you do down the road can correct poorly formed plastic, and you don't want to have to go back in the assembly stage when you're finally putting all the hardware in and the holster shell is fully closed, you've got your retention hardware in, and you're getting a true read on the fit for the first time. You don't want to have to be going back then and getting out a heat gun and messing around with the holster. So my goal is no heat gunning ever. Ever. Okay? If I run a production batch, I should be able to make 100 holsters that are spot on the same, where I can't blind tell them apart. I could pick up 5 holsters in a row and then reorder them, pick them up and test fit them again and not be able to tell them apart. That's the consistency I'm looking for, and the goal is never have to heat gun the holsters. And so really it's the an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure equation. If you prep the mold well, if you anticipate the problem, if you figure out where the snag points are, Glocks are probably one of the easiest things to learn to mold on. So if you're just getting into holster making, stick with Glock. Make yourself, have your first 30 holsters just be Glock, because it's a pretty square shape. It doesn't have a lot of levers. It doesn't have a lot of snag points. You'll want to fill in the ejection port. I like to block out the takedown levers. You'll block off a channel that goes all the way out to the back of the slide for these controls. Yeah, if you heat gun your holster, it shows. The definition you get by heating and manually pressing or relieving an area never visually matches the definition that comes from a good forming step. And so to anybody who's got eyes to see, the difference will be obvious. The same way if you go into a room that's been painted and somebody had to go back and spackle a few spots and then touch that up with a brush, anybody who's ever painted before will notice that one spot, it sheens differently, it stands out like a sore thumb. Typical clients won't notice unless you do a really bad job and you overheat and you spot gloss the plastic with your heat gun, which just means you were impatient, you got greedy, you tried to go too fast. But anybody who's got an eye to see you knows kind of look at it and go, oh, you had to heat gun that. And that's what we want. One of the things we want to avoid. When it comes to heat gunning, if I were holding a holster shell in my hand, I've got a shell wrapped around this mold, I need to relieve the area around the trigger guard a little bit because it's too tight. My heat gun work looks like this. Invisible heat gun. Okay? Heat gun, about 5 seconds, and then away. Got some kind of big bug flying around my light, so you see this shadowy reflection. Couple seconds, heat gun, and then let it rest. Couple of seconds of heat gun, and then let it rest. If you do this number, boink, and you just sit there with the heat gun, you'd be like, oh, starting to get warm. Oh, no, I glossed it. If you keep the heat gun on there for any period of time, you're going to gloss it. So the heat takes time to transfer into the plastic. So if you're heat gunning, give it a dose, give it a rest, let it sink in. Give it a short dose, give it a rest, let it sink in. You'll see the color of the Kydex change a little bit. You'll see its shape soften, and you can poke it and say, yeah, that's soft enough for me to remold a little bit. But the quickest ticket to glossing a holster, making it look like garbage, is to go boink and just leave the heat gun pointed at one spot for too long. Okay? So if you have to heat gun sparingly and move it around. Don't camp in one spot. Move it around, give it a rest. Move it around, give it a rest. You can also screen off or mask off areas you don't want to heat with a piece of leather, a folded up flannel glove. You can put some aluminum foil tape, a wet washcloth, something to protect the areas you don't want to overheat, you don't want to soften from the heat. Same thing when bending wings on outside the waistband. Yeah, there are a few ways to do this. Some guys put it in a vise and use a metal piece. This is the Caleb Dahl, Stature Man, does this. Put the holster in a vise, use a piece of aluminum to shield off the upper part of the holster, and then you use the heat gun with a duckbill, one of the wide flat attachments, and you heat a very narrow line until you can just bend the holster in relation to the vise. Gives a pretty nice, crisp, straight line. Another way is some guys will lay them over a strip heater, which is just a housing with a long heat element, which is commonly used when you're using this kind of holster mold to heat up your center line and then fold it shut around a drone. If you're looking at a strip heater, FTM is the best bargain out there, $215 on Amazon. Get the 24-inch one. Do not bother with the adjustable heat controller. The really budget option are the green strip heaters from Quincy Labs. I had one. I didn't like it. It didn't get hot enough for me, which meant I spent too much time waiting around. But some guys like Chris Williamson and Bobby Jackson, who are wrong, advocate for using them because they say you can put something on here and walk away, even though it's not true, and we know it's not true now because they posted a picture of a holster they melted in half. So if you use a Quincy Labs strip heater, you still have to keep an eye on the holster shell. And if you're going to keep an eye on the holster shell, there's no reason not to get an FTM. It'll be faster and cleaner. End of story. Yeah. Yeah. Or you can make your own. Quincy Labs, they're 12-inch ones, like $100, a little bit more, over $100. Not bad. But for $215, totally worth it. I have a really big one that was made in Canada, an EMX2. It's 50 inches long, which is ridiculous. But it means that me and my employee can both stand at it and have plenty of real estate to work, and we can have multiple holster shells on, each of us, and be folding, which means the speed at which we can fold through a batch of holsters, way up there, which is awesome. But even on an FTM 24 by 24 inch, two people can probably lay it on a table and work one end of it each. The really budget option is a 1-inch flat iron for hair. They work really fast. I've been using one for more than a year. So this is a popular hack if you have enough space between your mold halves to actually fit a 1-inch flat iron a hair straightener in there. But you also have to have no blocking or anything else. You need to have a clean, unobstructed sight channel. If you... I don't do mic drops. Dan Taylor, I do mag drops. That's gonna be. I think that's gonna be a recurring thing now. Anytime I get salty, I'm like, mag drop. Some of my holsters have blocking that protrudes out partly into the sight channel because on my appendix holsters, I like to have that slide side soft loop far out so I can get the loops far apart and get the most stability possible. But I also angle that one to help rotate the holster. I also put a little wedge on the back of my holster to tip the muzzle out and rotate the grip in. Lots of options there. But if you have blocking that goes out into the sight channel, you can't drop a 1-inch wide hair straightening iron in there. So you just have to decide what works for you. Adjustable retention versus non-adjustable retention. If you are a noob, if you're getting started and your forming is not on point yet and your results are inconsistent, you're probably going to want to stick with keeping adjustable retention because it will allow you to compensate for forming errors somewhat. If you're a professional, if you make holsters for a living, I'm totally fine with you doing adjustable retention because it's what you want to sell and because it's what your customers expect, but you should be able to, with the right tools, you should be able to, if you wanted to execute cleanly and consistently a non-adjustable retention holster that works really well right out of the box, where your customers will not have to adjust it because it has enough retention to be secure, but the break past the retention is clean and fast. Love the site challenging buddy. LZ Tactical Holsters. Kevin Renkert, thank you very much for buying one. I appreciate it. I've put a lot of little things out into the market in the past 2 years. I collaborated with Mike from Red Eye Tactical to bring the outside the waistband backers to market with the wing bends that you can take a half of a split mold and lay it on there and do pre-formed, pre-wing formed outside the waistband holsters. On that note, we are working on a little bit of secret sauce for those to try to find a way to get them to work more plastic efficiently on a non-membrane former, thrift press, swift press, etc. Because I know some guys are having some problems because once you go over the mold and over the backer and onto the table, you're using a really big piece of plastic, and that gets expensive, especially if you're working with carbon fibers or prints. Plastic options. There are a lot of printed plastics out there, things like HexCam, different Cryptek patterns, different Woodland, imitation, multicam, different things. Most of the companies sell those options. I don't think DIY sells the patterns, but Knife Kits does, NX Fastener does. If you want something custom, Tactical Infusions makes good prints. Holster Builder is another place I forgot to mention. They source and stock a bunch of different supplies from different companies. So I think they sell molds and hardware and spacers and plastic. And if one of the other places you would normally buy from is out, there's a good chance they have it, so check them out. Jessica and Joseph Haslar run that, and they're good people. Formed up my first with the G19 HDPE mold from Pistol Forms today. Easy peasy. Now to master the trim router, says Mike Holmes. So that's one other thing I wanted to tell you about. I shot another Facebook Live video today just to check to make sure my comments were working because they had been crashing the last 2 times I did Facebook Live. These are 2 different versions. This is the new and improved HDPE mold that's going to be coming to market through multi-molds. So, 2 versions. This one, you can see those light points. This has got pre-drilled vacuum holes. They're 95% drilled through. You just have to take a 1/16 of an inch bit and chase the hole and put it through if you want to use it on a vacuum former. We've added some extra material around here, so if you want to put blocking there and put one of the Eidolon claws out there, you can, or if you have any other reason why you want to have extra material there, you have that option. We put some more space down by the muzzle, and the muzzles are extended 1/8 of an inch, although the barrel and guide rod are still included there, so you can have a fully closed muzzle that has the look, the appearance, the cosmetics of being molded on the actual firearm and having those details in. But if you want to do a fully straight cut muzzle, you can cut right here at this line, and it will be flush with the tip of the gun. So we basically built in 1/8 of an inch of a faux end in order to give you the option of open or closed. And if you decide to go open, have a really clean, straight end where the Kydex projects flat out off and doesn't conform to the radius of the muzzle. I always hated the look of open muzzle holsters where in order to get it to stop flat, they had to cut it back here and expose the last 1/8 of an inch of the slide where the radius was. When will they be available at multi-molds? Asked Dan Taylor. I'm not exactly sure. Conrad, Miller, and I are divvying up the production on those, so some of those molds are coming out of my shop, some are coming out of his shop. They're getting sent to Tony, who's stocking them and handling all the fulfillment. There's still some moving parts there. We don't have all the division of labor fully decided yet. But here's the other version of the mold, which is the cool one that I wanted to show you. This is a trim-ready version. And what this means is it has no prep molds for vacuum forming. This is not designed for forming. This is designed for making trim molds, which can be used on a router table. I'll get to that in a minute. But this has a 1/2 inch thick backer, nice and chunky. So you can make a holster shell, fold it up, trim it to your final shape, sand it up, get it to fit just the way you want. Have just the right clearance around your sweat guard, around your mag release, clearance for your middle finger so you're not rubbing on the kydex. Get that whole thing done. Then heat the center or just chop off the side channel, separate the two halves or fold it open. Lay it back on this guy, trace all your lines on, very carefully and cleanly bandsaw cut that, and then clean up those edges with a sander. Lay out with a drill bit or an auto center punch, one of those ones that goes click, 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 bam, and then gives you a prick mark in your material. Lay out your hole locations for your eyelets or your hardware. Drill holes, and this 1/2-inch backer is thick enough that you can put threaded inserts directly into it, which means you no longer have to take this mold, form a kydex shell, take it off, pour resin into it, let it cure, get it out without damaging it, and then cut it up and make it into your trim. So these are trim ready. For the forming molds, we're starting with 1-inch stock. For the trim ready, we're starting with 1.5-inch thick stock. This is something we've not offered before. Guys always ask about trim molds, but nobody wants to have exactly the same shape as everybody else. So making a generic trim mold was not a good option. And if you want to have a CNC machine mold made to exactly your profile, there's some testing and some revisions and some customization there. And so you get charged custom mold prices for that. So we're going to be launching the forming molds, and for a couple of the most popular models, we'll be launching a trim-ready version right out of the gate. So probably Glocks, Shield, that kind of stuff. There'll be a trim-ready version. If you drill a hole in the decks to hold it, won't you need to end up having the hole in the finished part? So you basically need to have adjustable retention? No. Nathan, you just need to use the attachment points where your eyelets are going to go for your non-adjustable retention. Or you can attach... if you drill a hole in the decks to hold it, won't you need to end up having the hole in the finished part? Yeah. Okay. Let me clarify. If I were going to trim this into a shape, you know what? Let me just grab one. 1 second. Here's an old trim mold that I don't use. You guys are lucky. We spent lots of money to have these standard with our stuff. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, guys are still going to have to put in a lot of time and labor to make these themselves. This is not a turnkey solution for trim molding. It just allows you to have the material you need in order to make what you want. So here's a trim mold, Nathan. This is one I don't use anymore. This is for my old, now phased out this was my Mod 2 appendix holster. You can see I've got threaded inserts here and here. The finished holster gets 2 eyelets below the trigger guard, which meant I would just take my holster shell, and after I formed it, I would have those eyelet locations marked on the mold. Hey, Mike said the chick, thank you for stopping by. I'd have those eyelet locations marked on the mold. I would drill out 1 hole here, 1 hole here. I would lay the shell over here and then put screws through those holes into the threaded insert, which would hold the shell securely on here. If you're going to use a trim router to shape your shells, you have to very carefully pre-cut. I want, usually if I'm using a trim router, I want a maximum of 1/8 of an inch of kydex hanging off the edge for the trim router to cut. Otherwise the cut gets too heavy and it's kind of scary. So this is a little bit more of an advanced process. If you are using split molds and you want to use a router table and you want to be able to cut consistent shells over and over and over again, the simple cheap way that we always used to do it is you would vacuum form a holster shell on a mold like this, and then I would usually leave that on there, cool it in place, and then heat up another larger piece of 60 thou, drop it over top, and vacuum it on top of the first layer of kydex. And then that second layer of kydex would be an overlay template that would fit on my holster shell. Well, what I would do is set the .060 aside. I would take that 80 thou holster that I'd formed, and I would fully finish it out. I'd cut it up, I'd fold it up, I'd do everything I needed to make sure it worked out just the way I wanted, and then I would transfer it by tracing it back into the .06 piece, and then cut out the .06, clean up its edges. Didn't have to be buff, but it had to be clean. And then anytime I made that holster again, the .06 would lay over the .08 shell after I'd cooled it and taken it off, and I could trace around the entire thing with a silver Sharpie and have my cut lines pretty accurately all the way around. That was the state of the art in 2011. But nowadays, guys are forming the shell, pre-cutting the bulk of the material off, and then putting it on a template like this, which has a taller edge that you can put a bearing against, and they're using a router table, usually with a 2-flute, straight cut, shank bearing bit. 1/2-inch diameter is the most common. You want a 1-inch length to cut. I use Amana, Freud, Whiteside, CMT. A number of companies make a bit like this. It's called a flush trim bit. The most common one is 1/2-inch diameter, 1/4-inch shank, 1-inch length of cut, 2-flute. You want carbide. Don't get some cheap, junky, high-speed steel crap. And then you can use that to essentially trace this template and cut off any kydex that's hanging over it, with the end result that your kydex shell exactly matches this outline. You pull that one off, put a fresh one on, you bolt it down, you take it to the router table, you trace around it, take that one off, put the next one on, bolt it down, trace around it, and you can make 10, 20, 200 basically identical shells, and then I go straight from that step to buffing. I don't have to sand the shape because there's no shaping left to do. John, that's not actually correct, because your trim template doesn't have to fit that tightly, and so you can just approximate the shape. It doesn't have to be super tight to the shell. So you don't necessarily have to drill holes through the first layer of kydex to get the second one to vacuum form acceptably onto it. Obviously, if you're using a membrane former, which most guys are. If you're using a non-membrane former, you just have to use a big enough second sheet that it can still seal down to the table around the mold and around your first sheet. So yeah, forming and trim-ready versions are coming soon. I'm pretty excited about those. Principles and priorities when it comes to building a holster. Different companies make very different products because they have different priorities and imagine different uses by their end user. I'm going to break down what I value, what I prioritize. You can take or leave it, but I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Socrates, the unexamined holster is not worth wearing, is not worth making. If you haven't thought through why you're making it that way, you're making it by accident. So I'm totally down with companies making holsters that have different priorities than mine have, and therefore are different designs with different attachments, different hardware, different shapes, different functions than mine have, because they're trying to do something different. If I'm trying to build an off-road vehicle and they're trying to build a sports car, I'm not going to say, your sports car is crap, it sucks at off-road, because they're building something different for a different job. But if you're going to be going off-road and you don't think through what that vehicle needs to have, it's not going to work well. Hello, Brian Bunn. I hope those holsters I made for you are working well. Or that holster I made for you, and mag carriers. And so my order of priorities, very top, security. The holster has to hold the firearm securely. The gun should not wobble around, and it must not be able to just fall out. Which means holsters where you put the gun in, turn the holster upside down, and the gun falls out are a 100% no-go in my book. Because I'm building the equivalent of a Jeep. I'm building holsters that are not designed for the greatest possible speed. They're not highway holsters. They're off-road. They're designed to be used for everyday carrying and, if necessary, fighting. And for a fighting holster, you want security. You want the gun to stay put until the person who's getting the gun out wants to get it out. You don't ever want that gun to come into play or come out of the holster unintentionally. So security, which means you have to have a level of retention that's sufficient to retain the firearm. That being said, the second thing is it needs to be accessible. Holsters that position the gun in a place on your body that are awkward or difficult to reach, so small of the back, I don't make small back holsters. I don't recommend anybody carry there. I very much believe in appendix carry, which is forward of the 3/9 line, in front of your hips, because I believe that it offers the best balance of security and speed of access. I'm thinking about getting a sticker that says "I'm nut for appendix carry." Mag drop. But I want my customers to be able to access the firearm, and that means they have to be able to get a full firing grip. So bulky holsters with a big, wide sweat guard that goes all the way behind the firearm. If the gun's holstered up, if the sweat guard covers all this area back here, that's a no-go. It gets in the way. And so my holsters are always designed to allow a full firing grip, and my ride height is set high enough that the person can get all these fingers around the grip of the gun and not be diving into the top of their belt, which means that my holsters ride higher than a lot of what's out there on the market. A lot of guys, for deep concealment, are running their holsters too low, where it's concealable, but it doesn't matter how well it conceals if you can't get it out when you need it. So I'm willing to trade a little bit of concealability for better access. Because if I need access, I need access. I don't need concealability. Yeah, would you guys buy those if I had an "I'm nut for appendix carry" stickers? Or below the belt. Yeah. The belt line should run right about here. Boy. Right about here. You want about that much space right there for that finger to get in there and get a full firing grip. If the belt line's running here, and I see this a lot, where the grip is disappearing behind the belt line, that it might be more concealable, but the weapon access is terrible. So don't do that. And one of the ways I prevent that is I don't give my users attachment options that allow carry that deep. If somebody is a super Israeli level 0 operator and they really do want to carry the whole gun down in their pants, then there are options for that. I don't recommend them, but you can find them. I won't tell you where to look, but you can find them. But it's not a good carry method. You want the full grip available for the user to grab and pull. So for me, security, access, and then in third place, concealability and comfort. And those two are often, I think, put too high a position. People put concealability or comfort first. Comfort should not be number one. It doesn't matter how comfortable the holster is. If it doesn't retain the firearm securely and or you can't access the firearm quickly and effectively, it's not making you safer. It's actually probably making you less safe by giving you a false sense of security. If you're a holster maker, basics include you need to train. Because if you're going to become a subject matter expert in what your customers need, what will work, what is safe, what is effective, you have to train. You have to go through pressure testing. You have to do force on force. You have to do shoot to failure drills. You've got to do things that really stretch you in your gear. You have to find out for yourself and be fully convinced. Not because you read it on primary and secondary, not because you saw some Insta-famous dude shooting fast and telling you so, but because you tried it and you saw for yourself in real life that it worked or it didn't work. That's important. So invest your time and money in training. Know what the heck you're talking about. Places I recommend for training. Top of my list. I really like Mindset Lab in Indianapolis. I think it's fantastic force-on-force training. South Narc, Paul Sharp, the Yeti, Steve Fisher does good stuff. Trek, MDTS, I'll get these. MDFI, good. There are a lot of very competent instructors. So vet your instructor. go to somebody who teaches things that are Grant Cunningham. Like Grant Cunningham is the master of killing sacred cows. That guy kills more sacred cows in a week than I will ever do in a lifetime. And he does it in a very unpretentious way. He's not trying to prove he's smarter or tougher. He's just dealing with the reality, which a lot of trainers don't, which is, as a trainer, and what you need to understand as a holster maker, is the vast majority of your customers are not interested in shooting or concealed carry or training as a hobby. They are interested in it only for self-defense, and honestly, there's not that much you need to know in order to make an impact on your ability to defend yourself. A lot of people with zero training still manage to use a firearm effectively to defend themselves. Could they do better? Undoubtedly. Do some people who don't train lose and die? Yes, they do. Training will only ever improve your chances, unless it makes you so overconfident that you do stupid stuff. You go stupid places with stupid people and do stupid things. But I seen it on IG, says Daniel Taylor. Yeah, I seen a lot of things on IG. I seen a lot of things I wish I hadn't seen. I'd seen a lot of things that make me want eye bleach on IG. So you need to know what works. Comfort and concealability are good. They are desirable insofar as they don't come at the cost of security and access. Okay? Obviously, the world's most secure and accessible holster that's excruciatingly painful to wear is going to be a dud. Nobody's going to wear it. So you have to have enough comfort. You have to think through making the holster comfortable enough that the person can actually bear to wear it. But I don't think that's very hard. Generally, my approach to comfort is very simple. Make the holster footprint as small as possible and round all the sharp edges. Done. That's it. I'm often surprised when I see holsters that have very angular cuts and hard corners and stuff sticking out of them. I'm like, it doesn't help the holster function. It's just for looks, and it looks cool, but it can't possibly improve the carry of that holster. It can only make it worse. So for me, security, access, comfort, and concealability. Other things, other considerations like it looks cool on Instagram, way down on the list. Consider buying and wearing some of the holsters which work. Yeah. If you're a hobbyist and you're getting into holsters, if you don't already own any good holsters, I would say spend your first few $100s getting some gear from reputable holster makers and get a taste for what works. Have something to use as a reference in your shop that provides a stable benchmark of fit, of retention, of quality, of comfort, and of access. If you want to make holsters, buy a couple holsters that people recommend and wear them to training. Absolutely. You're reading my mind, John Hopman, but you do that often. So find some holsters that are well recommended, buy them, wear them, and then make your own and compare them. And see whether you are or are not achieving the things you want to based on the benchmark, the expectation that's set by those ones that you bought. Those of you who are still hanging around, all 38 or 40 of you, if you haven't shared the feed already, I hope I've provided you with some value, some useful information. I would appreciate it if you would share the feed now. I'm still going and not going to quit for a few more minutes. I got my spoon. More spoon feeding will happen. If there are particular questions you have, hi John Schmitling, if there are particular questions you have, the basics thing, basic feeds are the best place to ask those simple kind of questions, and I will give you a straight dope, fast as I can answer that will give you something practical and relevant. I've had this conversation a few times with him, yeah. These bow tie spinners have also been super fun. Yeah? Yeah. Spinners. These are the latest hotness in everyday carry stuff. So the guys who like to have lanyards and beads and 2 knives and a couple of bottle openers and knucks and all that stuff now like to have, spinners. And I'm selling spinners. I got no problem with spinners. Spinners are entertaining, and if you're fidgety and they help you relax, great. But you should carry gun, spare mag, knife, flashlight, and a freaking tourniquet, in my opinion. If you have to get rid of some of that stuff, you should keep the flashlight and the tourniquet. If you can't carry a gun, where you have to go. Courthouse, school, whatever. I think, honestly, if I were being mugged and the guy asked for my wallet, the first thing I'd do would be like, bro, check out my sweet spinner. And while he's mesmerized, I would slowly draw my clinch pick and go all sewing machine. Or I would spin this, and just for a second, I would drop it in the air, and in the 0.55 seconds when it's going down and he's watching it, I would execute my sub 0.6 second draw and punch out at 3 feet and just light him up. Or I'd do the classic speed rock, you know, and then step back 5 feet and then Instagram style. But yeah, I mean, as a distraction tool during a violent life or death encounter, I don't think there's anything that's likely to be less helpful to you than a spinner. With the speed rock. Dude, the speed rock should have died in the 80s. I'm amazed that guys are bringing back the speed rock. It is the stupidest thing. There's no reason for it. If you are a good guy and you have to shoot a gun, you are 100% accountable for every single round you fire. And you cannot tell me, no matter how much of an ace speed demon crack shot you are, that if you start cranking off unsighted fire that's just indexed by body from the waist, that you're not going to miss in a violent encounter. Okay? If you come to a high number 2 and you're angled down at 45 and the guy's at arm's reach, you know, you're touching distance and you pop off a few rounds here, if you miss, they're going in the dirt. If you speed rock that sucker and you're cranking off rounds that are level to the earth and you miss, they're going until they stop in something or somebody. So I think that is inexcusable. Speed rock is inexcusable. I was not talking about center axis relock, which I actually don't have that big a beef with. I think it has application in vehicles. If you're in enclosed spaces, then shooting this way in a car, reasonable. I've done it in force on force. It works. You know, if I'm at 25 yards, am I going to blade and, you know, center axis relock to shoot at somebody? No. But I think, like everything, it's context dependent. Guys absolutely flip out over temple index, you know, the whole muzzle up, muzzle down, Sewell, whatever. Like, guys, depends where you are. Depends where you are. There are a lot of things that get shown out of context and then get discussed out of context and get bashed out of context when they actually work perfectly well in a certain context. Like, weapons manipulation inside a vehicle is a little bit different because of the space. You know, draw stroke is a little bit different. Some guys come right up and catch their gun on the wheel. If you catch your gun on the wheel and crank around into your leg, you lose, you know. Draw stroke where you come up and go around the wheel. Like, we don't train draw stroke where you come up and do this big sweeping motion. Okay, generally it's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. I like a 4 count just to explain where the gun's going to move through. But if you're in a vehicle, you might come, you know, appendix would come up usually tight and go over the wheel. If you're drawing from strong side, you'll go over the wheel this way if you got to go to the side window. Everything in its context. If you're a holster maker, understanding the context of where gear works, where it doesn't, where it fails, and why is information you have to have in the first person. So you got to pay for training. Once you've paid for training and you know what you're talking about, and you've got some stuff under your belt, you don't become the world's subject matter expert, but you have relevant information. Thanks, Shane Waller, for hanging around. Please stop in next time I have a Facebook Live feed. Keep an eye. I will be posting up announcements about it on the Kydex Forum groups on Facebook. And also, please follow me on Instagram if you guys aren't already, at Henry Holsters, all one word, on Instagram. That's where I do most of the photos and stuff from my shop, and I occasionally do exclusive live content from the shop, live video on Instagram. So if you check me out there, follow me, and turn on notifications so when I do cool live stuff, you can find out about it and watch it. Basics will also try to involve, in the future basics feeds, a little more actual doing of basic stuff so you can see what I'm talking about. I didn't talk at all about sanding or about drilling tonight. That'll get covered in one of the next ones. If there are particular questions you have about different tools, different techniques, ways of solving problems, or ways of making certain styles of holsters, please post it up in the comments or hit me up with a DM on Instagram or a message on Facebook and let me know what those questions are, and I will try to get to them in the next feed. I am feeling pretty whipped. It's been a long day, so I'm probably going to go straight to bed after this, which is unusual for me on a weeknight. Usually I'm burning the midnight oil out here in the shop, but I'm not feeling it tonight. So that's that for tonight. Thank you very much for stopping by for Basics 1, which covered a whole bunch of things, some things I hadn't planned and not everything that I had planned, but that's the way live feeds go. I appreciate you all coming by. Those of you who liked and shared the feed, thank you very much. And I hope you guys have a great night. I will obviously be posting announcements as we get closer to having these HDPE molds released through multi-molds. I'm excited about it. I think they're a great option. They're not the only option, and they might not work. They might not be the best solution for everybody, but for certain kinds of styles of holsters and certain kinds of forming, they're a great fit. And guys who have used the ones we've made through pistol forms have gotten great results with them. And I'm confident that the guys who use the ones we bring to market through multi-molds will also enjoy them. Yeah, Jeff, enjoy the beach, man. Have a great night, guys. Bye.